Welcome to this video. Alright, so in this video we're going to go ahead and look at level 1 type of problems. In the previous video we saw level 0 type problems. Here we're going to be looking at level 1. So let's start off with example or problem 1 here. Problem 1 is a level 0 type problem, but I'm going to go ahead and review this just in case you skipped over the last video. But here we have something squared is equal to 4, and this should be pretty easy to solve. So something times itself is equal to 4, and we can clearly see that that number is going to be x equals 2 or x equals -2. So if you stop and think about this for a second, you have something squared is equal to 4, so that something has to be 2 or -2. In other words, 2 squared is 4, or -2 squared is 4, right? -2 times -2 is also 4. So that's the idea here, that you have something, let me write this out, so something squared is equal to some number. So this implies that something must equal positive or negative the square root of that number. And if you think about this, we could take the square root of 4, and if we take the square root of 4 we get a positive 2, but we also have to remember, that we are going to include the negative solution as well, since when you square negative you also get that positive answer as well. So let's jump into example number 2. So here, this looks very different from number 1, but this is now a level 1 type problem. So here we have x plus 1 quantity squared, so the whole thing is being squared, and that's supposed to equal 4. Well, if we follow this, let me go ahead and put this in orange, but if we follow this general rule here, that something squared is equal to the number, and therefore something is equal to plus or minus the square root of a number, well, it turns out that our something is this x plus 1 that's sitting in there. So then we have x plus 1 is equal to plus or minus the square root of this number right here, this 4. And we know the square root of 4 is simply just 2. So now we have to just solve this equation. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is just move the 1 over. So I'm adding 1, so the inverse of addition is subtraction. So I'm going to subtract 1 on both sides, and I end up with x equals. Now here's what I'm going to write. I'm going to go ahead and write this -1, and then I have this plus or minus 2 there. And this simplifies to two different answers. So for the first part, we have -1 plus 2. For the second part, we have -1 minus 2. And we can go ahead and solve these individually. So what is -1 plus 2? Well, that's simply just 1. And -1 minus 2, that is -3. So it turns out that the answers here are x equals 1 and x equals -3. So if we substitute these numbers back into our equation here, we should get that we get 4. And in fact, if you get the 1 and plug 1 in here, you can have 1 plus 1, that's 2, and 2 squared is 4. If you plug in a -3 plus 1, that's -2. And we know that -2 squared is also 4. Alright, so let's jump to another one. So let me just go ahead and scroll down here a little bit. Alright, so let's look at problem 3. Problem 3, we have something squared is equal to 8. So we know right away that something has to be equal. So let me go ahead and write our something. Our something here is 2x plus 1. So 2x plus 1 must equal positive or negative square root of 8. Now, 8 is not a perfect square, so we don't know the square root of that. But in the previous video, we saw how to simplify square roots. I'm going to go ahead and just simplify the square root of 8. If you're having trouble simplifying the square root, go back to the previous video so that you can go ahead and review that. But we're going to end up with 2x plus 1 is equal to plus or minus. Now 8 can break up into 4 times 2, and the square root of 4 is a 2. And then we leave the 2 inside alone. Again, go ahead and go back to video 1 so that you can watch how we go from this step to this next step, if you're a little stuck there. Alright, so what I'm going to go ahead and do is now solve for x. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is move this positive 1 over, and when I move it over, it becomes a -1. So I'm left now with 2x is equal to, let me change my color, we have -1, and then we have plus minus 2 square root of 2. Finally, the last step is you want to isolate the x. Well, I'm multiplying, so the inverse operation multiplication is division. So I'm going to go ahead and divide. So I'm going to divide by 2, but if I divide the left side by 2, then I better divide the entire right side by 2. Now this looks a little funky, but that's actually our answer. We can just say that x is equal to -1 plus minus 2 square root of 2 all divided by 2. And that's pretty much it. As weird as that looks, this right here is our solution. Alright, so let's look at our last example here. Let me zoom in a little bit. Alright, so here we have x minus 3 squared is equal to 12. So something squared is equal to 12. Now our something here is the x minus 3. So that means that x minus 3 must equal plus or minus the square root of 12. Now again, 12 is not a perfect square, but we can go ahead and simplify 12. So this turns into x minus 3 is equal to plus minus. Again, 12 can be broken up. I'll just go ahead and jot it down over here. 12 is really the square root of 4 times the square root of 3, and we know the square root of 4 is simply just 2. Square root of 3 stays inside, so this turns into 2 square root of 3. Okay, now we have to solve for x. So this -3, when I shoot it to the other side, or when I move it over, it was negative, so when I move it over, we now have it positive. So x is equal to positive 3 plus minus 2 square root of 3. Again, we cannot combine these since they are not like terms, so we say that this right here is our solution. So again, not much going on. As long as you know how to solve level 0 type of problems, then level 1 is not really a big deal at all. It all comes down from this example, example number 1, that something squared is equal to this plus or minus the square root of that number. So here's some problems that I'd like you to just freeze on. So you can freeze the screen right now or pause it, and go ahead and try these 4 examples and see how you work them out. Maybe I'll put a video where I have the solutions to this, or maybe I'll just share the answers with you in class and you can compare that with what you worked on.